Yo, what is good, everyone? Zik here. I hope you're enjoying your Wrath of the Lich King pre-patch experience. I've been super stoked for all the changes coming with Wrath, but more than anything, I've been looking forward to the Arcane Mage changes. There's really so many cool things that change with Arcane from TBC to Wrath. It felt like they took a spec that was mostly based on like bare bones power, the way it was sort of a support spec in Classic for either Fire or Frost, and then just a very high damage spec in TBC without a ton of utility or sustain, and turned it into an actual spec that you can sink all your talent points into and absolutely destroy people. In this video, we're going to take a look not just at what the build is, but also why it works. We're going to get into the damage rotation, the CC and utility at your disposal, and then finally a couple tips that I've figured out after playing this build quite a bit for the last couple days. Before we dive into the details, I just want to give you guys a quick preview of the build. So this is with 61 talent points because we are level capped at 70 still. I will cover how I plan to evolve this build to 80, as well as a couple deep arcane variations that are going to be possible with 10 more talent points that I cannot wait to try, but that's going to be towards the end of the video. The very first thing I want to cover real quick that is very important to understand is how Arcane Blast has changed from TBC to Wrath. In TBC, when you casted Arcane Blast, every cast gave you a stack, and every stack increased the cast speed of Arcane Blast, but also increased the mana cost. This basically resulted in being able to do an insane amount of burst damage if you're allowed to just stand there and free cast, but simultaneously utterly destroy your mana pool. It seems like in Wrath, they took this idea of being able to build stacks with Arcane Blast and turned it into something much more interesting, powerful, and viable. Now with Wrath of the Lich King, every time you cast Arcane Blast, instead of getting an increase in cast speed, you're going to get a 15% stacking damage buff. This buff increases the damage of all arcane spells by 15% and can stack up to 4 times. The mana cost of Arcane Blast still increases with each stack, but it's much more manageable and realistic because mana goes way further in Wrath than it does in TBC, and you're also not casting the spell over and over again at light speed for maximum mana cost to just instantly deplete your mana pool. Now the big kicker is that this stacking damage buff only accumulates as you're casting Arcane Blast. As soon as you cast another damaging arcane spell, that's going to expend the buff. So both the damage and the mana cost of the stacks will reset at 0. Now this mechanic really lends itself to the beauty of this rotation in that you can use Arcane Blasts to sort of build your damage power up, almost as if you're like charging a Kamehameha Blast, and then you can put all that extra power into your next arcane spell. So whether that's an Arcane Missiles, an Arcane Explosion, or my new favorite, an Arcane Barrage. I think where a lot of people go wrong with Arcane is they think they have to stack those Arcane Blasts for it to be effective, and that's just simply not the case, especially right now with how overtuned damage is. You can do an insane amount of damage with 0 or 1 stack, and so you'll see me a lot of times casting an Arcane Blast and immediately following it up with a Barrage. Basically what that's doing is it's keeping my Arcane Blast mana at its minimum cost and simultaneously giving every Barrage I throw out 15% extra damage. After every blast into Barrage, you have a whole global, so a whole second to reposition yourself on the battlefield accordingly. And I would say for Arcane Mage, more than Fire or more than Frost, positioning is very important, especially with the way slow works into your utility. So overall, this is just going to give you a lot more mobility and freedom to move around and avoid damage versus just trying to stand in one place and hardcast Arcane Blast over and over. Now all that being said, if you do have an opportunity to stand there and just chain Arcane Blast together, definitely do it, because that's going to give you the Mondo crazy numbers. But in reality, it's hard to find a solid 10 seconds where you can stand there and cast a 2.5 second cast 4 times in a row. And so the way you want to think about it is just get as many blasts as you can in while you're in a safe position. As soon as you're about to get threatened, you either want to throw it into a Barrage and move with that global, or put it into some missiles. I think Arcane Missiles is probably the most undervalued and underutilized spell by most mages and most specs. While it has a lot of utility in Fire and Frost, in this Arcane build, your missiles actually slap so hard. Here's why. Not only do you no longer suffer pushback for either missiles or blast, your missiles also get an extra 45% of your bonus spell power, and your Arcane Blast gets an extra 9%. So if you're at 1,000 spell power, your missiles are shooting at 1,450 spell power. Your Arcane Blast is shooting at 1,090 spell power. Just as icing on the cake, this talent also increases the damage of all your homies by 3%. Let's not forget that the base spell power that your missiles are building off of is empowered by Mind Mastery, so you get 15% of your total intellect as spell power now, and you also just get 9% more total intellect from Arcane Mind. So those stack very nicely. Oh, and let's not forget that every missile crit is also going to benefit from the spell power talent. which is probably the most OP talent for Arcane, and that's going to increase the critical strike damage bonus of all your spells by 50%. So one of the reasons Frost as a build is so strong is because of the Ice Shards talent, and that basically makes it so your Frost spells criticals hit for 100% more. But it's only for your Frost spells. So the spell power talent is a similar thing, but it benefits all of your spells. Something that's so crazy about the Arcane Shatter build that I ran a lot in TBC, and that will be one of the deep Arcane variants that I try at 80, is that spell power and Ice Shard stack. And so your Frost spells are literally critting for 150% bonus damage, and then you get to put all the stacking spell power in Deep Arcane that we just discussed, and then put an Arcane power on top of it with a Palm Frostbolt into the biggest lances in the game. And it's all working through Shatter, where your chance to get these 150% crits is like 70% plus. Anyways, we'll get to that later. On top of all the stacking spell power for missiles we've already discussed, along with the increased crit damage from the spell power talent, giving you 50% more, you can also glyph Arcane missiles to crit for 25% more. So your Arcane missile crits are actually hitting for 75% more damage. And that's stacked from the bonus spell power from Mind Mastery and the 45% bonus to missiles from Arcane Empowerment. So your missiles are popping off, baby! And quite possibly, one of the coolest things about this build is the final talent that affects missiles in a huge way, and that is Missile Barrage. So basically what this does is it gives your Arcane Blast 40% chance to make it so your next missiles, instead of being a 5-second cast, it's a 2.5-second cast. So literally cut in half, and it's free cast. It's clear casted, so it doesn't cost any mana. And so you literally will shoot out 5 missiles in 2.5 seconds, one every half second. And as you can see from some of these clips, a lot of times those missiles are hitting for huge base damage because of all that stacking spell power. And then when you have Arcane Power or Arcane Blast stacks on top of that you feed into missiles, and those missiles crit and benefit from the spell power talent, oh my goodness, they absolutely destroy. Alright, so the final big piece of the damage rotation is going to be Arcane Barrage. And you've seen me use this a ton already. I absolutely love this spell now that I've gotten my hands on it. It is insane right now, and it's basically just a giant ice lance that just has a 3-second cooldown, but you don't need stuff to be frozen. You can just talk them out willy-nilly. And you can scale the power up if you're able to chain Arcane Blast together. Like I said earlier, I really favor the 1 or 2 Arcane Blasts into a Barrage. That basically keeps the mana cost within a reasonable range, so you can stay in fights a lot longer, and it still puts out enough damage right now, especially if you have really high spell power, to just instantly delete people. And I think in general, you really want to try to use your clear casts, which have a 30% extra crit chance from Arcane Potency, on Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage. And that's mainly because when you get your Missile Barrage proc, that's already free, mana free. And like, I'm not perfect at this. I was figuring out the build kind of as I got these clips, and so I definitely don't execute on this stuff perfectly. But if you were to do it perfect, essentially what it would look like is you want to use your clear casts for Arcane Barrage or Arcane Blast. Even, you know, like a high stacked Arcane Blast is really the most ideal. And so if you can anticipate it and can hear the sound, if you have a high stacked Arcane Blast, that's a really good time right after you cast Arcane Blast to throw in a Palm Arcane Blast, so you get an instant another stack and a huge cast while you can move. So you just get, like right when you finish your cast, so let's say for your second Arcane Blast stack, you Palm Arcane Blast for your 3rd stack, and you can just throw an instant barrage after that. So yeah, I guess the super ideal would be to do that same scenario but get to 4 stacks. So you would need to hardcast Arcane Blast 3 times, and then you would Palm Arcane Blast for your last stack, and then you would throw your full 60% damage increase into your barrage for maximum destruction. Oh yeah, and rip Arcane Power and a spell damage trinket before you do all that. And maybe go get Berserk Wolf. And also maybe rip a destruction pot, and that would do it. That would definitely do it. Or you could do all that right after you steal wings and then get lusted. And I think that would really set you up for success. In any scenario, you would just kill everything right away. The other thing you could be thinking about while you're trying to line all this up is every one of these Arcane Blasts is going to give you a chance at a Missile Barrage, which is just a free giant missiles with some amount of Arcane Blast stacks, because Arcane Blast is usually what procs it in the spec, and so I miss it a lot because I just started playing the spec. But if you're really watching for the Missile Barrage proc, and it'd be really sweet if you made like a dope weak aura for it, I'll probably try to do that at some point, so it was like really visceral and visible on the screen when it procs. I think in most scenarios it's ideal to just kind of cancel whatever arcane blast damage chain you're on and just rip those empowered missiles, because it's just so much damage so fast. You're immune to pushback. They give insane pushback. They go through walls. They're just completely insane. All right, so that's really the deep arcane sort of trifecta of spells that work really well together. Arcane Blast, stacking that up and putting that into Arcane Barrage or Arcane Missiles, especially missiles when you get that Missile Barrage proc. And then the last arcane spell that's really at your disposal to pump the power of Arcane Blast into is Arcane Explosion. And so really the main time you want to use this is when you can hit like 3 or more people all at once and you need to get something out instantly. And so I use Arcane Explosion as like a group cleave or as like a little bit of extra damage to finish someone off. Or if I like basically don't have, if I'm having to move or kite and I don't have a global to use like Fire Blast or Arcane Barrage or anything like that, that's a good time to just throw in a quick explosion for a little extra damage. And then the other really cool thing about Deep Arcane is all your other spells still benefit from all this stacking spell power. That's what's so cool about Arcane, is it feels like a much more versatile build than Frost and Fire, where you're kind of just using mainly those spells in those builds. In Arcane, you can still use fire spells and they slap because they still get all the benefits of your spell power stacking, plus the 50% bonus crit damage from spell power, which affects all of your spells. And so really you want to use Fire Blast kind of on cooldown. Anytime you're like weaving right after you throw your blast into Barrage, you want to follow that up with a quick Fire Blast if you can. That's basically your filler right after you throw out your damage chain for a little extra burst. And then still using Nova for the root and Cone of Cold for the slow for kiting. But your Cone of Cold actually does pretty decent damage, so you can use that as another little instant filler. And then your Ice Lance actually will still pop if you have someone frozen. So a lot of times when you Frost Nova, it's because people are all around you. Usually while I'm trying to kite back from that Frost Nova, I'll try to throw a Lance or 2 at the frozen targets, like throw one at this frozen target, throw one at that one. And then by that time you have enough space to start casting again or throw a Barrage or into a Fire Blast or whatever else is off cooldown. But you know, Arcane Barrage is on a 3-second cooldown, so you really can be cycling that in a lot for a lot of extra damage as you kite. And then Fire Blast is on a pretty short cooldown. So those are kind of your 2 main like instant damage spells as you're kiting. And then if you freeze someone, throw Lances and use Cone for the chill. You're never going to find yourself really casting Frostbolt or Fireball. You could use Scorch in some scenarios. I'm not that great at weaving Scorch in, but if you like Scorch as part of your damage rotation and you have 1.5 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds to cast, you could definitely hard cast Scorch and that'll still pop pretty good. But yeah, other than that, this is kind of what you're working with. Even though the D-ranking for spells has changed, I guess you could also use a rank 1 Frostbolt just for the increased cast speed for the slow. But with slow as an actual ability, the only time you would really need this is if you have 1.5 seconds and you're trying to slow an extra target. All right, next we're going to cover the utility in this kit that's not really part of the normal mage kit. And so you can still use your Frost Nova for the root. You don't have a chill effect, so you can't really use Blizzard other than trying to get someone out of stealth. But even then, it's like 2,000 mana to try, so you better be damn sure of where you think they're at. You still have your Cone of Cold chill to use to kite. You still have your Ice Block to use as normal. The only thing that gets cooler with this Ice Block is you can instant invis out of it. And so I found a couple scenarios where this is actually so clutch, where you can, you know, essentially clear the dots off you and then immune all damage and wait for an opportune time to instantly drop your block and turn invisible. And so one of the coolest things about the Arcane kit in this version of the game is you literally get a vanish. And so you take your invis cast time to 0, and so you can do it instantly, and you can actually use this in the same way rogues can and the same way night elves can now, to immune incoming spells. And so if you want to use it with Ice Block, you can sort of use it as an escape tool to guarantee stealth instantly out of the Ice Block with no dots on you. You can also just kind of use it as another way that you would sort of use Ice Block, where, you know, you're trying to immune a giant damage spell or a giant volley of arrows or a giant mace or axe that's about to hit you in the face. You know, you can block, and now you can also try to banish that essentially. And so that's huge. You also have improved blink, so your blink is half the mana cost, and also for 4 seconds after you blink, your chance to be hit by all attacks and spells is reduced by 30%. And so blink is just really clutch in this build. You know, really trying to save it as an escape tool. A lot of times with that 4 seconds after you blink really gives you these windows where you can live to a point where you can get more space. And once you have more space, you're going to want to use the #1 piece of utility in this kit, which is slow. Slow is such an insane spell. It was in TBC, but it was not nearly as powerful as it is now, because the mana cost was like triple, and also your mana didn't go as far, so you were a lot more limited in what you can do. So oftentimes throwing out a couple slows is taking a big chunk out of your mana pool, and with the amount of people that can immune them or dispel them because it is a magic effect. I just found myself oftentimes going because of it instead of it being super effective. So now that it's a low mana cost and your mana pool goes away farther, you can actually sort of keep it up even if it's getting dispelled. And a lot of times, because it's such a low mana cost, it's actually a good trade for someone who's chain dispelling themselves. And it's such an obnoxiously powerful spell. Literally 60% movement speed slow, 60% range attack speed slow, so extra effective against hunters, and increases casting time by 30%. So hunters and casters that can't dispel this get real fucked by it. So in general, you just always want to keep slow up on someone, either whoever you're trying to kill or whoever is trying to kill you. You know, decide which one is higher priority to keep slowed, but you can literally keep this up all the time. Even if it's getting chain dispelled, if you have the globals, you can just keep trading it back, you know, and this is what really lets you get those windows where you can cast your 2.5 second Arcane Blast. And so slow is basically your utility to set up your big Arcane Blast burst chain that we talked about earlier. Yeah, that's basically all I can think of right now from the utility side of things.
Oh yeah, sheep and counterspell stuff as well, mainly healers. Also, they changed the school lock to 8 seconds now for mage. And so in TBC, using counterspell just for the blanket silence is really good. But now, if you're patient enough and you actually wait to get a holy school lock or a nature school lock, they're actually not going to be able to cast for 8 seconds. And so if you do get a holy lock on like a pally or a shaman, try to wait that full 8 seconds before you go into a poly. They can still do other stuff, but they will not be able to heal. So you can basically lock out their heal school for 8 seconds, and then you go into a full triple sheep DR chain, and that's just a lot of time they're sitting there doing nothing. All right, as far as gear goes, it's really not that complicated. I think people overthink what they're doing with their gear a lot. Basically, if you're playing mage, you either want to be in a very heavy spell power, stam, resil build, or you want to be in a higher crit spell power build. And so usually fire mages favor higher crit, usually frost mages favor higher spell power and higher stamina and resil because they don't need the crit percentage because they're working off of shatter. And so because I was playing the level 70 version of this Arcane Shatter build we're going to take a look at, I really didn't need the extra crit, and I favor building just raw spell power anyways. And so my mage is basically full Season 4 with all the Dreadweave, like Warlock pieces, all with a little bit of extra stam and spell power and resil. I think this build would also be very effective, possibly even more effective, with like a fire build, a really high crit chance, because then a big chunk of these spells would be critting all the time, and you're still getting that clear cast 30% crit chance. On top of all that, I don't think there's enough haste in the game right now to build it and have it be really worth it, but I do think that 80 haste will be another very viable attribute for this kind of build, where you're really just increasing the speed, not just of how fast you're casting everything, but also your globals. You know, so right now, just get some honor and build as much Season 4 as you can. Just decide if you want to go sort of that fire crit build, or if you want to go more of the stacking spell power resil side of things.
So I think the last thing worth talking about, sort of just referencing Arcane in general, is the stacking spell power and how good that is just for mages in general, and then how well that actually plays into some of the other talent trees like fire and frost. And I thought this video was going to be shorter, and so I would have more time to kind of go into this, but I'm going to probably save, you know, these other specs for future videos where we really get into them. But I do have a couple deep arcane variations lined up at 80 that I'm so stoked to try, that I showed at the beginning and I'm showing again here. So this first one is essentially how I think I would play this similar sort of build at 80, like a deep full arcane build, and really just going after the extra crit, the reduced cooldown on fire blast, and the silence immunity in fire. Other than that, you're just chilling in arcane. And then you can take basically everything we talked about this video. You could pare down just a few talents here and there and move enough into fire to get Pyroblast. And so you can basically have the build in this video, but with Palm Pyro as part of your kit, and even Impact as well. So I think that one's going to be super fun and is going to deliver the biggest Palm Pyroblast in the game. And then the one I'm looking forward to the most, the one I cannot wait to try, the one I think is actually going to be so good and fun, is this Arcane Shatter build. And this is, I didn't play TBC a ton. It's not my favorite version of the game. I played a little bit in Season 1 before New World came out, and then I've played the last couple months sort of catching up, getting ready for Wrath. But when I was playing, most of the time on my mage, I spent in a similar level 70 version of this Arcane Shatter build. And the idea is basically you have the Deep Arcane kit with all the stacking spell power, and you still have the spell power talent that gives you 50% extra damage on all your spell crits. but then you get to stack that with ice shards. So now all of your frost spells are critting for 150% bonus damage. On top of that, you have the most spell power out of any mage spec in the game because you're deep arcane. On top of that, you can use arcane power into Palm Frostbolt on a frozen target to give you the biggest frost bolts in the game, and then you can follow that up with the biggest lances in the game if that target remains frozen. So it basically is a deep arcane spec, still focused on shattering. And so not only do you get all this insane spell power with 150% stacking crits, you also get shatter. And so all this crazy spell damage coming out from your frost spells is going to be connecting at like a 70% plus crit rate on your frozen targets. And so it's such a fun build at 70. I literally cannot wait to try it at 80. And so stay tuned for that. I definitely plan on having a video on that out as soon as possible once I am 80. And if you like this video and this type of content, I've always sort of just put together my own WoW builds. I started really getting into doing builds for New World that were very successful. And now with this round of Wrath, I really want to focus on using my knowledge of the game to create builds that are fun and diverse and kind of give people a new way to play or experience the game that maybe they haven't thought of or tried before.
I'm also trying to stream on Twitch now. So that is TTV/Zikorik, but with a 0 instead of an O.
I'm trying to stream like Tuesday through Friday, like probably around 5 Pacific into the evening. Mostly like WoW PvP. And when Wrath launches, I'm going to be going all in. And so I'll probably be streaming way more for the first couple weeks after Wrath launch and then get back to this normal schedule. But thank you so much for watching. I am rambling and I digress, but I appreciate you as a human and as a WoW player. I hope you are enjoying Azeroth, and it is as beautiful of an escape from this crazy world that we live in as it is for me. So enjoy, and I hope to see more Arcane Mages out there blasting away. All right, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.